Hi, everybody. Have you ever heard of the distributed firewall, micro-segmentation, service-defined firewall, intrinsic security? What is all that stuff? We're going to take a look at the distributed firewall, aka the service-defined firewall, in this episode. Stay tuned. This is going to be a little bit of a lecture and a demo. Some really important stuff I'm going to be covering, especially in the demo. So you really want to watch that right to the end. I've got some stuff on optimizing your firewall rules. I've got stuff that you want to be aware of. What's this applied to field? We'll look at how the rules are applied to the filter and how we can examine that. So a lot of really, really good stuff, okay? So stick around. We'll see you soon. Bye. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking around. What we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the NSX firewalls. More specifically here, we're going to look at the distributed firewall. It's all part of the intrinsic security for NSX. So a couple things before we go on. When we talk about NSX firewalls, there's two firewalls. There's the distributed firewall, which we're going to focus on now. There is the gateway firewall. They are two separate firewalls, but you manage them centrally from the NSX manager. So the distributed firewall, which we're going to look at against a stateful layer 7 firewall, so layer 2 up to layer 7, and it's for east-west traffic. So east-west traffic is communication horizontally, like between your VMs, let's say, right? North-south would be like traffic going in and out of your environment. The layer 7 can do north-south. For example, I could create a firewall rule on a VM saying you can't talk to, Facebook.com or something like that, right? But typically it's really for east-west. It's available, the distributed firewall is available on all the hosts that you prepare for NSX. So when you go back to like preparing your transport nodes, it's the modules for the distributed firewall are installed. It is a kernel module installed on all prepared hosts, which I just mentioned. Eliminates firewall hairpinning. What is firewall hairpinning? A good example of this would be if I've got two VMs running on the exact same ESXi host, and let's say you want to create a firewall rule so VM1 can't talk to VM2. Well, VM1 wants to talk to VM2. It's got to go out into your core environment, hit your firewall, and then at that point it says, you're not allowed to do that, and gets dropped. So I just generated a whole bunch of traffic in my real environment, right? Because the distributed firewall is a module installed on the host, and one of the things you'll see about it's actually a filter installed on the NIC of your VMs, it gets dropped at that source. So if VM1 can't talk to VM2, it gets dropped right at source, and I'll show you that. There's a filter installed on the NIC of the VM independent of the virtual machine's operating system. Yeah, so what this distributed firewall is really just a firewall installed on all the virtual NICs of all your VMs, and it's really just a filter, which I'll show you when we get into the demo how you can examine that filter, right? And again, because it sits outside of the operating system, I don't care what operating system's inside that VM, to be honest with you, it can't circumvent this firewall, okay? Which is really good. Now, the gateway firewall, I'll talk in the next video, in the next series of this. Again, it's available. It's a service on your Tier 0 or Tier 1 gateways. So if you don't know what a Tier 1 or Tier 0 gateway is, you need to look at that routing stuff, okay? Runs on the service router component, so requires an edge cluster. Now, again, if you didn't look at that NSX routing lecture and video I had, you need to understand that, because one of the things is when we talk about gateways, they have these components. One's a distributed router component, and the other one's an SR, services router component. This SR runs on an edge VM, or sorry, I shouldn't say VM. It runs on an edge node, which an edge node runs in an edge cluster. So because we're going to put a firewall service on our gateway, we need this edge cluster / edge node, because this SR is going to be, we require that. Now, one of the things, notice over here, says requires an edge cluster, and it can run as active standby or active as of 4.0.1.1. So I'll talk more about that when I get into the gateway firewalls. I'm not going to go down the road right now. Enforcement only on the uplink of the gateway, and I'll talk about that again when we get there, okay? But right now, we're going to look at the distributed firewall. Before we go forward, just a couple of quick definitions here. A service, most of us probably know what a service is. A service would be like a predefined service. Here is an example of like SSH or DHCP or FTP or something like that. There's a whole whack load of predefined services in NSX, and you can define your own. A service also has a predefined, could be a predefined group of services. NSX does have its own predefined groups of services. And a service can also be a raw port and protocol, like TCP port 22 or UDP, whatever, 53 or whatever the case may be, right? So that's what a service is. Now, a group you may not be familiar with. Group is an NSX construct representing a collection of objects. This object could be like a VM. It could be like an NSX segment, that type of thing. It could be a NIC or whatever, right? Now, these groups can be one of two methods. We could populate them statically. You pick and choose what you want to go in a group, and I'll demo that. Or dynamically, based on some kind of query, like the name of a VM, or a tag, which I'll talk about this. And tags is one of the best ways to actually do this. It's actually what VMware recommends. And I'll demo that when I get into the demo portion. So groups can be static. You pick and choose what you want to go in there manually, or dynamically. It's self-populating based on a criteria that you made, which I'll show you in a demo. Now, a firewall policy. A policy is really just a collection of rules, right? Firewall rules. And a firewall rule is just basically, a source, a destination, a service, and an action. What am I allowed to do or not? And I'll show you that. For the most part, I think rules are pretty straightforward. So a policy is really just a collection of rules. A scope of a policy enforcement can be selective with application or workload level granularity. What are they talking about there? I could create a policy that's protecting a bunch of VMs, but I could also be specific about only apply it to these particular ones. And I'll show you that in the demo, okay? All right, so just a couple of definitions there. So now, let's talk about the distributed firewall. When we talk about NSX security in general, it's not just one component. You'll see over here, it's actually a bunch of things. We have the distributed firewall, which includes like app and user ID, fully qualified domain name filtering, malicious IPs. We can do filtering on that. It includes the gateway firewall, okay? Includes various other advanced threat prevention, which I'll be talking about in other videos, IDS, IPS, malware, network traffic analysis, that type of stuff, right? So the NSX security model, we'll call it, is based on not just one component, but a bunch of them. The heart of it is the distributed firewall, which we're going to talk about right now. So here's the components that make up a distributed firewall, which is rather important. So we have our NSX manager at the very top here, okay? And your users access the NSX manager with the browser or through, or through an API or whatever the case may be. Again, you notice it's HTTPS. The NSX management cluster, again, if you don't know what that is, watch the beginning video, what's NSX, okay, and its architecture. The management cluster basically is made up of the management plane and the central control plane. And then we have down here our host, our ESXi host, the transport node, which is the data plane, okay? Now, you'll notice a couple of things here. Down on our ESXi host, right, we have a vSphere distributed switch. One of the things I do want to point out here is this module, the vSIP module, the VMware Service Insertion Platform. This is that firewall kernel module. This is the distributed firewall. Now, when I take a closer look over here, you see this? You see this firewall right here? This is a filter that's on the NIC of a VM. So all your VMs have a virtual NIC, right? Or virtual NICs. Well, they'll all have their own little firewall. So it's sort of like putting a firewall in front of every single virtual machine that you have, right? And that's what this filter is. And I'll show you how you can examine that. So that's the distributed filter. You'll also see, let me clear up all my scribbles here. You'll also see this DPI engine, Deep Packet Inspection. This is the layer 7 engine. This is the layer 2 and 3 engine down here, right? So the Deep Packet Inspection engine allows me to do rules based on context. And what I mean by that is like applications, right? I want to block SSH, not just port 22. I want to block SSH. I don't care what port it comes in on. And I'll show you that in the demo as well. So Understanding these components is rather important. You'll notice that the vSIP module runs in the kernel space. So that's the distributed firewall. So a couple things here, which I've never talked about before, but we have our NSX management cluster. It talks to the control plane down on the host. This is what we call the local control plane on the host. Notice it's on port 1235. So you can think of this as control plane communication right here, control plane. And then over on the right, you actually see there's TLS port 1234. You can think as the management plane, okay? And the reason why I'm pointing this out is when I create a rule up here in the NSX manager, so I create a firewall rule, it pushes it down to the central control plane. Central control plane, well, first of all, the management plane will take that rule and validate it. Yeah, that's a valid rule. And then it will send it down to the central control plane. And the central control plane now is responsible for getting it down to the transport nodes that need that rule, right? So it sends it down to the local control plane, and then eventually gets it down to the vSIP module on the host. The vSIP module then is responsible for applying that rule or rules to the filter of the NIC, or the firewall on the NIC. Now notice over here, the management plane, this is actually used for stats in status. So for example, how many times did this rule get hit, right? That would be a good example of that. How many packets went through that rule? That would be stuff that goes through the management plane. So control plane over here, port 1235. This is how we populate the rules. Retrieving stats is port 1234 over here, okay? So this is a very important concept. Again, this distributed firewall is really just a filter on a NIC on the VM. Okay, and I'll show you all that in the demo. Now, we can't talk about the distributed firewall without mentioning micro-segmentation. You probably heard of it as well. Oh, by the way, you'll also hear stuff like, let me back up a couple slides. You'll also hear stuff like the service-defined firewall. That's a new term VMware kind of came up with a little while back, the service-defined firewall. And what is that? Well, remember, here's the distributed firewall. There's other stuff that goes with it. One of them is like IDS and IPS, right? Intrusion detection and prevention system. These would be like services I could turn on and off if I want to. So that's why you'll hear this term service-defined firewall. But anyways, they're referring to the distributed firewall in a nutshell. Now, micro-segmentation. One of the really cool things about the distributed firewall is because it's a firewall on the NIC of every VM, right? A lot of times I could do micro-segmenting. So for example, maybe I have, let me just call this web up here, right? This is web. So all these are my web servers at the top. These are my app servers in the middle, my database servers down at the bottom here. And then I have various services, infrastructure services, DNS, DHCP, etc., Active Directory, right? Now I could, if I want to, all my web servers are on this one web segment. I got my app server on the app segment, database on the database segment. Now, I might have like a finance department, for example, HR and engineering department. Each department is going to deploy their own workloads. These workloads are made up of, let's say, web, app, and database servers, right? I could do something like this. I could say, oh, okay, these are the app, database, and web VM for finance. Great. They can talk to each other, but they can't talk to anybody else. So in other words, this web server for finance cannot talk, we'll say that's web, to the web server for HR or engineering. I can do micro segments where they cannot see each other whatsoever. I can even do it at layer 2 where they can't even see the broadcast, right? So we can do that, make these micro segments. So again, the finance server only sees the finance VMs. They don't see the other ones, right? HRs or engineering and vice versa. However, they all need NTP. They all need, let's say, DNS. They all need access to Active Directory or whatever the case may be. So you could still do that. I could say, yes, finance could still talk to NTP. NTP can talk to finance. But I cannot do a hop, skip, and jump from NTP to, let's say, HR, let's say, right? Okay, so I can do stuff like that if I want to. So that's micro-segmentation in a quick nutshell. Another thing you'll see is what they refer to as a security rule model, okay? Here you'll see they've got emergency rules, infrastructure rules, environment, intra or app rules, and default rules. One of the things you'll see when I do the demo, and I'll bring this up like any second now actually, is the distributed firewall has categories, okay? And we could populate our groups in these different categories. One of them could be emergency rules, right? Block everything, or quarantining or something like that, right? One of them, another category could be my infrastructure rules. This is where I would put all my rules for my, let's say, DNS servers, NTP servers. Everybody needs to talk to DNS. Everybody needs to talk to NTP, Active Directory, or whatever, right? Then I can have environments or app rules or whatever the case may be. So my application rules, again, I can make rules based on the per workload, let's say, right? And there's also a default rule as well. Ultimately, you're going to work towards the default rule to be drop everything, right? And I'll show you that in the demo. The distributed firewall's default rule is allow everything, and I'll show you that in the demo, so you want to stick around for that. I'll explain why and how you want to migrate to that. So that's it pretty much for a quick synopsis on what the distributed firewall is, just a very high level view of it. Let's do the demo. This demo gets a little bit involved, okay? I'm going to show you creating a simple rule, and then I'm going to show you how we analyze this rule, okay? How do I know that the rule's been applied? So stick around. By the way, if you stuck around this long already, thanks very much. Why don't you hit that subscribe button? That would greatly benefit me completely. That would be great. So hit that subscribe button if you don't mind. So let's jump into the demo. So let's get started with our demo. Now, before I do that, let me just show you a quick thing here. This is my environment right now. It's kind of a messy drawing. I got my physical environment here. This is one. It doesn't really matter. We won't be talking about that. We have a tier 0 gateway. I got a tier 1 gateway. I got a 2-tier environment. If you watch me do the router and segment demos, then you see me build this, okay? So I've got 3 segments. I got my web segment. Let me just go with purple. I've got a web segment, got an app segment, and I got a database segment. The web segment's on the 172.16.10 network. App is on 172.16.20. Database is on 172.16.30. I've got 3 web VMs here. First one, web 1, has an IP address of 172.16.10.11. The second one's .12. The third one's .13. The app is 172.16.20.11. That's app 1. And database 1 is 172.16.30.11. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a simple rule. So let's say me block SSH from web 1 to database, just as a quick example. Okay? So let's jump into that and I'll explain it. So here we go. So let me, first of all, before I start creating rules and all that stuff, let me go into my vSphere environment. Here's my web 1. Right now it's running on host 1. Where's database 1? Database 1's on host 1. Let's put it on host 3. I'm just doing that just for the hell of it. I didn't really have to do that. Host 3. Okay, the next. Just let that finish. So this way they're not on the same host, just to illustrate something, but it doesn't really matter for the demo. Okay, so database now is on host 3. Web 1 is now on host 1. I've got a cluster here, Site A cluster, which 3 ESXi servers and a bunch of VMs. Let me open up the console to Web 1. Let me just test my connectivity. So again, if I just type in ifconfig, you'll see Web 1's IP address is 172.16.10.11. That's right over by ETH1 here. So I'm going to ping 172.16.10.12. That's Web 2. It's working. Web 3, it should be working. I'm going to hit app. That's 20.11. That's the app VM. It's working. And then the last one is the 30.11. It's database. Again, if any of you watch the routing, the segments and the routing videos, I built this whole up on that. So if you want to see me build that from scratch, watch those videos, right? Okay, so let's SSH into database. I'm on web 1. Let's SSH into 172.16.30.11. It should let me. There it's asking me for the password. Boom, I'm on database. Okay, oops. Host name. Yeah, so I'm on database 1. All right, let's exit. Great, I'm off now. Let's go ahead and create a firewall rule. All right, let me go into NSX I'm going to go, I wonder where we create the rules. Well, security sounds like a good starting place. Let's go to security. I got my security overview. I don't really have anything set up. We'll talk about some of these things in other videos and whatnot. But I want to create a distributed firewall rule. So I'm going to go under policy management. I'm going to go under distributed firewall. And under there, you'll see one of the things that's warning me about right now is identity firewalls turned off. I can create firewall rules based on user identities like an Active Directory. So for example, let's say a user is part of the HR group. Well, they're allowed access to these set of machines, let's say. Maybe I'll do a video on that, but for now, we're not going to worry about it. Notice over here, I can look at all rules. Again, this view is read-only. This allows you to get a list of all the rules that you have, or I can go category-specific rules. Now, in the lecture, I showed you some of those categories. So you've got over here Ethernet. That's all your layer 2 rules. You have emergency. You have infrastructure. You have environment. And then you have application rules. If you don't like the names of these groupings, you could rename them using the APIs. But for example, my Ethernet would be all my layer 2 rules, if anybody's creating layer 2 rules, but you could. Emergency would be stuff like quarantine, right? I think of this as, I ever watched one of those Transformer movies, and one of the Decepticons was hacking into the military computers, and they said, cut the hard line. And the guy runs over with an axe. I guess he didn't see the big switch on the wall, right? But anyways, doesn't matter, right? So I think of it like that. You could also create quarantine rules as well. This really comes into play with dynamic rules and partner integration. Like, if I find a virus on a machine, I want to put that one into quarantine group. And anybody with this quarantine group, all access is blocked, let's say, right? Then you have infrastructure. Infrastructure would be stuff like everybody needs to talk to NTP, everybody needs to talk to DNS, everybody needs Active Directory, let's say. Those would be infrastructure. Then you have environment. Environment might be stuff like test dev, any kind of security regulations, that type of thing. Then you have your applications, which would be like your workloads. How we process rules, like a typical firewall, we start from the top, we work our way down. So when you look here, we start on the left, we look at the Ethernet rules, we look at all the rules there, start at the top, work our way down. Once we've done that, then we go to emergency. Start at the top, work our way down. Once we've done that, then we go through infrastructure. Start at the top, work our way down. At any one time we get a match, we exit out and do whatever that rule says. If it says stop or block or allow, then we do that. We don't continue on. All right. So the order of your rules are very important, right? So we start from the left and we work to the right, sort of like reading a book, right? Well, I guess for most, anyways, you read a book, you open up the page, you start at the top, you go around and you work your way down. Then you flip the page and then flip the page, so on and so forth, right? That's one way to look at it. I'm just going to jump right into application. When I open up the default rule, you'll see there's a bunch of default rules here, DHCP, IP6, whatever. The default rule to allow everything. Now, that's the first thing that kind of throws people the first time they're seeing this. It's like, whoa, hang on a second, Steve. Every firewall that I played with, the default rule is to block everything, right? So think about this. If we blocked everything from the day one, once you prepare your transport nodes, potentially what would happen is all communication in your environment would shut down, right? That wouldn't be a good thing. So ideally what you want to do is work towards setting this to drop everything, right? And create rules that allow your traffic in your environment. So you would create a set of rules saying this workload's allowed to talk to this stuff, this workload's allowed to talk. You would go through and create all those rules, and then once you've got everything done, you would say, okay, I think I'm good now, and then you would basically go in here and set this to drop or reject, right? Yeah, okay. So let's go in and create a rule, okay? So I'm going to go in here. I'm going to say, first of all, we have to create a policy. So policy contains rules. So I'm going to click on add a policy. So it pops up over here, new policy. Let me just kind of minimize this. So I'm going to call it whatever, Steve's SSH policy, right? Okay, call it something that kind of makes sense, right? I'll talk about applied to and stuff like that later. Notice over here, there's a little time. We can actually create a time window. This rule is only applicable between certain hours, certain days of the week, once, twice, or whatever the case may be. So you can create rules based on time if you want to, right? I don't really care. I'm going to editing process will be lost. Yeah, I want to get out of there, right? So I can do stuff like that if I want to. Over on advanced configuration, if I click on that, TCP strict. If you want to allow that, stateful. Stateful. Do you want to make this a stateful firewall? Yes or no, right? Locked. what this means is when you say locked, let's say I'm editing this policy. So let's say you got a bunch of administrators, and I'm going to edit this policy. So I'm going to go in and lock it and apply it, and I'm going to go and do my edits. This way nobody else can go in and do edits at that point, right? Now you might be thinking, oh, Steve, what happens if somebody, disgruntled employee, decides to lock everything and then leave, right? Well, anybody that has the NSX admin role can unlock it, okay? So I'll talk about user access maybe in another video. I'm not going to lock it. I'm going to cancel all that. There's my policy. I'm going to click on the ellipse over here, and I'm going to say add rule. I can add a policy above or below, but I'm going to add a rule in this policy. I'm going to create a really simple rule. I'm going to say my rule is block SSH to database, whatever. All right. Now, I know this is just a demo. Most of the times you're going to be creating whitelist rules, and you'll have a default deny everything, right? Just in my lab environment, I have the allow. I'm just leaving the defaults, okay? Now, you'll notice over here I have a source and destination fields. So my source can be any, destination can be any. Let's click on source. Now, the source here, you'll see there's some groups here, some default groups here, but I really don't see any machines. I can pick addresses, or I can type in an IP address if you want to. So you can create rules based on IPs if you like, which is fine, right? I'm going to cancel this for a second, folks. Let me create a group. Let me go into inventory. It's going to say, yeah, navigate. So it's going to get rid of my changes. Let's create some groups first. So I'm going to click on groups under inventory. You'll see some default groups there as well. I'm going to click on add groups. And then I'm going to give it a group name. I'm going to call it web servers. Web-servers. And I'm going to say compute members. Now, I talked about groups in a lecture. Groups can be dynamic or static in nature. Static is you pick and choose what you want. So let's do I can go into here, members, and I can actually go in and let's go in and pick under categories here. Let me pick NSX segments. I can put those in if I want to. I can put NSX ports in there if I want to. Notice it says virtual machines. I don't got any physical servers, but I can say virtual machines, right? And I can go in and pick my VMs if I want to go in there. And that would be a static membership. We select those and say add, and I'm done. I could pick IP addresses as well. Enter IP addresses or MAC addresses or Active Directory groups. Remember I mentioned Active Directory, right? But I'm going to go and create a dynamic group. Okay, so I'm going to say group criteria. I'm going to add criteria, and I'm going to say it's the virtual machine or the NSX segment or the port or distributed port, whatever. I'm going to say the virtual machine. Now notice over here it says tag equals, or I can say the name of the VM equals, or the operating system name equals, or the computer name equals, like the host name, right? I'm going to say the virtual machine's name equals or contains or begins with or whatever. I'm going to say contains the value web in it. And I'm going to say apply. And I'm going to say save. I can add multiple criteria. I can make it as complicated or as simple as I want, right? And notice over here there's web servers, and I can say view members. Let me click on view members. There's my 3 web servers. So it went out because NSX, because I've got vCenter server set up as a compute manager, and when it looked at the inventory, said, oh, here's all the VMs with the words web in it. Great. So it took those. Let me just add 2 more groups here. I'll call it app servers. I'm going to say set. I'll say criteria, virtual machine, name, contains, app. Apply, save it. I'm going to do one more. Come on. Add group. Database-servers. If you've taken my classes, but I've done this exact demo. Virtual machine name contains DB in it. And apply. And save it. There we go. App, database, web service group. Let's go back to our security now. Let's go back into a distributed firewall. Let me go again. All that stuff that I did was erased because I didn't publish it. So let's add that policy back in. I'll call it Steve's SSH policy, whatever. So your policy might be like a workload, my workload 1, workload 2, whatever the case may be. Great. I'm going to go in and add a rule. The new rule is block SSH to database. Great. My source now, I'm going to go into here. And notice there's my groups again, right? There's my groups I created. I'm going to say source is my web servers. The destination will be my database server. And then services. I'll click on here. This is basically my layer 3 and 4 services. There's a whole crap load of them there. You can add in your own if you want to. I can do raw port and protocols, add a service entry. So if there's something specific you want, a certain protocol and raw port, no problems. I'm just going to go into service. I'm going to filter this. I'm going to look for SSH. Come on, hit enter. And there's the SSH service, right? If I open this up, you'll see it's TCP port 22. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to say OK. So I just created a rule. I'm creating a rule, sorry, to say web cannot SSH into database. Context profile, what's that? This is layer 7. Okay? So I'm going to click on that. I don't need to specify that, but let me show you what I mean by here. Let's do SSH as well. Hit enter. So this rule here actually is looking for the SSH app itself, right? The contacts. So in my previous example, I've said SSH port 22, right? And really what it's looking for is TCP port 22. Now I can be specific and say TCP port 22 SSH. So for example, if I'm not going to select this, I'm going to cancel this. So if I create this rule right now with just the layer 3 and 4, so TCP port 22, you could be smart and say, you know what, I'm going to change my service so it uses port, whatever, 27 instead of 22, and you'd be able to SSH in, right? Whereas doing a context profile, you're really narrowing it down and saying, no, I don't care. You're not allowed SSH, period, right? So again, you can keep that in the back of your mind. I'm just going to leave it like this. The applied to distributed firewall, I'll explain that later. What do I want to do? What action? Do I want to allow it, drop it, or reject it? Allow does exactly what it says. Yeah, go ahead, go through. Drop, well, it does the same thing. It drops, right? It drops it. Reject, it rejects it, but also sends back a message saying it wasn't allowed. So drop is something that that you'll probably select. Reject, like I said, will tell you, oh, hang on a second, this wasn't allowed. I'm going to pick reject just for the sake of it. Now, while I'm doing all this, none of this matters because I have to hit this publish button up here, okay? Again, under my settings here, this is where, again, I can say, do I want to do logging? Do I want to log? Every time this rule gets hit, log an entry, okay? And that gets logged onto the host, the distributed firewall log on the host that the VM's running. You'd probably have syslog set up to get it logged to a syslog server. You're probably not going to log every single entry because that would probably be pretty brutal. But again, you could set it for certain ones for testing, right? I'm gonna enable mine just for the heck of it. What direction is this rule? Is it only allow in or out or both? What protocol, IP4 or IP6 or both? Log label, interesting. A log label allows you to sort of customize the log entry. It'll put a label in there and put whatever you want. I'm going to put this is Steve's cool rule. And my typing is horrible. Actually, my keyboard, I need a new one. Some of the keys are getting sticky, right? So I say, and you'll see what happens here, right? And then comments, you can put in whatever comments you want, right? Some people just ignore the comments, whatever. That's actually rather useful because how many times have you done something 6 months later, you go back to it and go, why did I do that, right? So comments are very priceless here. You may want to add that in. I've got a fly going around here. You may want to add that in. This is a rule for whatever. If if you need to explain it to yourself 6 months from now or a year from now while you're doing this. I'm going to leave that. I'm going to go apply. Again, this rule, again, hasn't kicked in yet until I hit this publish button. Let me show you. Let me go to my web 1. What's SSH in? See, it's let me in, right? Boom, I'm on database. Let me exit. So I'm back to web 1. Let's go to NSX. Let's publish this thing. So notice over here, it says it's in progress. Okay, thanks very much. It says it's in progress. I can hit that refresh button. It was successful. Beautiful, right? If it couldn't publish that, if all of a sudden it failed or was sitting there for so long, remember when we talked about in the lecture, it uses port 1235 to go 1234 to go through, right? So you would want to make sure these services run and stuff. I'll do a troubleshooting scenario on. Let's go back to web 1. Come on, don't make a liar out of me. Let's SSH. Connection to host, port 22, connection refused. That's because I said reject. Okay, I got the error. Let me go back to here. Let's change that to drop. Let me publish that. Let me refresh this. There we go. Let's go back in and try it again. Oops, wrong thing. Let's go back to here. Looks like it's hung. It's just going to sit there eventually till it times out. So that's the difference between drop and reject. Reject spits back an error at you saying, yeah, this is not allowed. That would be good if you want to do testing, right? Like I'm setting up my rules. I want to make sure the rules are actually, being hit, and, I want to actually check it out. So that's kind of confirming to me, oh yeah, the rule's doing that for me, right? So that's kind of a possible use for it. Leaving that in production, you're kind of telling the hacker, oh, looks like they're blocking port 22. Let's try something else. Whereas it just sitting there like this, not getting any kind of acknowledgement, makes them question if there's something wrong at their end maybe, right? So again, just a little FYI, okay? So that's pretty much it, right? Now, let's go back to NSX, and let's check a couple of things out. Let's take a look at where the filter is. How do I know the rules on that VM? I want to go to that VM and look at the filter. Well, there's a couple of ways to do that. One way is to go to the host, the ESXi server, SSH into it, and then and check it. All right. So let's take a look at that filter. So let's go back to vSphere. Web 1 is running on host 1. What else is on host 1? Database is not. What else? App is on what? App is on host 3. Let's move app to host 1. I just want to have some VMs on the same host here. There we go. So I just move app to host 1 just to save me some time. Okay. So right now web is running on host 1. Database is on host 3. That's fine. And app is running on host 1. Beautiful. Let me SSH into host 1. So let's connect to ESXi01. I'm going to type in the command summarize dv filter. I hit enter. Sorry, I went too fast on that. Summarize dv filter. When I hit enter on that, you basically get all the filters out on this host. You'll see over here, there towards the middle, it says world. And then you'll see over here, there's my web VM. And you'll see a world over here. Here's an app VM. There's other processes up here, like the firewall, ESXi firewall. But let's look at the web VM. Now, when you look at the web VM, it says vNIC slot 2. And here is the name of the filter, NIC, whatever number, ETH0-VMware-SFW stateful firewall.2. That's slot 2. We're not going to get into slots and stuff, but generally there's like NSX does like service chaining, okay? Think of a chain, links in a chain. So I can do integration with partners, and basically like our distributed firewalls like slot 2, a partner might be slot 5, that type of thing. VMware generally reserves the first 4 slots, right? 0 through to 3, is that right? And the last 4 slots, which would be 11 through to 15, if that's right, okay? So there's 16 slots in total, right? And VMware reserves those. The stuff in the middle, partners can generally use. That's kind of the idea. But anyways, the name of the filter right here, that firewall, the distributed firewall filter on that web VM is right there, okay? That's the name of the filter. There's the firewall. So now I want to examine the rules on there. So I can do basically vsip IOCTL. That sounds familiar. vsip, VMware Service Insertion Platform, IO control. And I always forget the commands. I just hit enter. It comes back and gives you a bunch of the stuff here. So I just want to do get rules. vsip IO control, get rules -F for the filter. And I'm going to paste in, because I highlighted that, there's the filter for web 2. When I hit it, or web 1. When I hit it, here you'll see all the rules over here. Now you'll actually see, here's a rule 4073, TCP strict, from address set, this address set, whatever that is, to this address set, whatever that is, port 22 drop with log, it's logging it, and a tag. This is Steve's cool rule. Remember I said, yes, I want you to log the rule and add this tag to that rule, right? So there's the rule. Now, hang on a second. It's talking about address sets and address sets. What the heck is these address sets? So I need to examine that. So again, I can just type in vsip ioctl get addr set -f for the filter. Paste. Oh, I highlighted it. I got to recopy my filter. Where is it? Right there. Recopy my filter. Just highlighting. There we go. And I'll right click to paste it. Now I'm showing me what the address sets are. So you'll see address set, this address set right here, and you'll see here's the addresses 172.16.10.11, 12, and 13, and their MAC addresses. Those are all my web servers. So it's saying this source, and then in this address set, it goes down to 172.16.30.11. There's my database. So what it did, it took the name of the VM, said these are the IPs of the VM, and it made these address sets. So it's saying 172.16.10.11, 12, and 13, block port 22, going to database. So that's kind of cool. So it actually shows me that. So there's the rule on the filter the VM. Pretty cool. Let's check something else out. Let me just clear the screen. Summarize DV filter. Okay. So let's do something like this now. Let's look at app. I created a rule saying web can't SSH the database. Let's look at the app filter. Where's the app filter? Nick, whatever number, There's the filter for the app VM. It's on the same host. That's why I put it on the same host, because this way I didn't have to SSH into another host, right? So I'm going to type in vsip ioctl get rules -f the filter for app. I hit enter, and lo and behold, firewall rule 4073. Again, this address set to that is blocking port 22. So what's going on there? The rule says source is app, destination is database. Why did it apply this rule on the app VM as well? Remember, this is a distributed firewall. So the generally when the rule comes into the vSIP module, its job is to distribute it across all the filters. That's its job, okay? That might not be the most optimal, okay? Now, I've run into teaching some customers, I won't say their names, but I remember talking to them and they're saying, and I'd show this exact demo, then all of a sudden they go, and I can see why our firewall is slowing things down. It's like, why? And they said, because we kind of left things at the default where it gets applied everywhere. Let me show you how I prevent this from happening, because that's not the most optimal, right? Let me just minimize this. Let's go back into NSX. Here's my rule, block SSH. Let me edit this rule. Sorry. Let me go into here. Notice under the applied to. Most of the times when you look at this rule, it's pretty straightforward. Source, destination, a service, an action, right? Pretty simple stuff. But what's this applied to field? I'm going to click on this. And the default is apply it to distributed firewall. That's the default setting saying apply it to everybody. Now, that may be fine if it's a rule that should be applied to everybody. Everybody needs DNS. Everybody needs NTP. Everybody needs Active Directory. Oh, great. Then, just leave it at distributed firewall. Everybody gets it no matter what. But maybe you don't want that in this case. I don't want that. It's not optimal. I'm going to pick the group, and I'm going to say only apply it to database servers and web servers, right? Since the rule is only for that. I'm going to click on apply, and none of that happens until I hit publish. I'm going to hit publish. We wait. It's in progress. I'm just going to hit that refresh. It's done. Let's go back now. I'm just going to use the up arrow key. Let's see. We're looking at the filter on app still. Let's see what happened to the rule. It's gone. There's the rule on the first time at the top. It's no longer here. Okay? So that's very important. All right? Whenever you're creating your rules, you really want to go in and say, you know what, should this rule only apply to this source and this destination, let's say? So then hit that apply to and make it only for that source and destination. there's a limit to the number of firewall rules a NIC can have, and I believe it's the number 3,500 kind of sticks with me, or it could be 4,000. But anyways, there's a limit to the number of rules a filter can have. So if all of a sudden you go in there and you start creating thousands and thousands of rules in your environment, and you leave the default, well, let's say you start creating rules 5,000. Let's say 5,000 and whatever. Well, that VM's only going to get the first 4,000 rules, and then it's not going to get anything after that. Also, it's not efficient. Remember, we got to process all the rules from the top down. Okay, so if I've got a bunch of rules there that aren't applicable to me, I'm wasting time. Okay, so you want to make things more optimal. Cool. That's pretty much it for that demo there. But I'm not done yet. Let's try something else out. Okay. Let me minimize this. What do I want to do? I want to go in and maybe there are certain rules that only should apply. I'm a little rusty on this one. Yeah. Maybe you got certain. Okay. Let me back up. Let's say you've got, remember I mentioned the distributed firewall applies the rules to all your VMs in your environment. Okay. Except for like edge nodes and stuff. It doesn't care about those. Now, you might want to, suppose if your vCenter server was also part of this stuff, you might want to exclude that, or maybe certain partner service VMs, you may want to exclude them from NSX firewall rules, because maybe, like for example, a vCenter server, somebody makes a rule against that, and all of a sudden, boom, they block access to you, right? So you might want to go in and create what's called an exclusion list. You click on exclusion list. Again, you could pick your groups if you want to. Use excluded groups or exclude VMs. Okay, I don't have any excluded VMs found here, but I could actually add a group. I could say, pick web servers, right? And I'll save. So there we go, right? So I actually said exclude the web servers from this. Let's try something out. Let's go back into web. Let's SSH in the database. It's still not letting me do it. What's going on here? Well, you got to think about it this way. I'm SSHing from web. So what it's doing, let's actually do one other thing before I explain that. Let's go into host 1 and let's look. Let's get the summarize DV filter. Let's go summarize DV filter. I hit enter. We see app there. You no longer see web. Web is no longer there. Okay? It's not, because I told it to exclude it, it doesn't get the filter. So that's why you don't see it there. But how come it can't SSH into database? Well, imagine the packet flow. I'm SSHing. I'm going from web. It says, hits the filter. Oh, you want to SSH a database? Yeah, no problems. Go ahead. It's leaving my host 1, getting encapsulated with Geneve, arriving at host 3, getting decapsulated, arriving at the switch for database, hitting the filter on the NIC of the database VM, and then it's saying, oh, you're not allowed to do that, and it gets dropped there. Whereas before, when I didn't exclude, it got dropped at the filter of web. Okay? So excluding them is a good thing. I just wanted to show you that, right? Let me go back in here and let's minimize this. Let's get rid of that. Let's go back into actions, exclusion list, and save. And let's just check that again. Summarize DV filter. There we go. Web is back now. Yeah, it's down here at the bottom. And there's its filter right there. Okay? Cool. Let's try something else out. Okay? Hey, thanks for sticking around. If you've been watching this so far, again, this is almost done. Hit that subscribe button if this is stuff that you like, okay? Hitting that subscribe button is free. It helps me out quite a bit, all right? I would really, really appreciate it. Also, if you like it so far, hit that like button. You don't have to wait till the end. Let's try something else out here. A lot of people aren't aware of, right? And this might freak out some of you, right? So let's go to web. Let's go back into here. Okay, so here's my web. Right now, when I look at the, let's get this down a bit. I got my resolution turned up so it looks a lot better. Right now, the network adapter is hooked up to the NSX web segment, okay? I'm going to right-click on Edit Web. Come on, Edit Settings. Where are you? Where are your settings? Edit Settings. And I'm going to put it, that's on an NSX web segment that I created back in videos of Layer 2 stuff if you want to watch it. I'm going to put this on a regular port group. This is a VM port group. It's just a regular vSphere port group, okay? Actually, let me put it on a port group on the distributed switch. Just nobody kind of... Okay, so I'm putting it on SA production. That's just a regular port group on a distributed switch. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to say OK. And it's queued up. And it's complete. Let's go back to Summarize DV Filter. Summarize DV Filter. Okay, there's Web 1. Let's copy the filter. There it is there. The SFW.2. Let's type in vsip IO get rules -f filter. Boom. No root rule set. What? Okay. I'm going to say something that's going to freak out some of you. You might start typing in the comments right away. Just hold off, right? The distributed firewall rules only work on NSX segments. Okay? So what I just showed you there is once the VM's on a regular port group, it doesn't work. Okay? Now, before you start freaking out, hear me out. So how did we used to do things in the past? Okay? So we would say, a customer would come up and say, well, I want to play with NSX. I really like the micro-segmentation, the security stuff. All that other networking stuff, distributed routers and gateways, it's all cool, but I don't need it. I just want the distributed firewall. That's it. Okay? So we would say, oh, okay, yeah, no problems. You could do that. You would prepare your host. You don't need to create any overlay transport zones, but you do need to create VLAN-backed transport zones. Then you would create VLAN-backed segments. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you got to watch my Layer 2 switching, logical switches, okay, where I talk about it. So then you would create segments, NSX segments, but they're VLAN segments, not overlays. So you're not playing with TEPs and Geneve and all that. Then you would take all your VMs on your regular port groups and move them over to the NSX VLAN-backed segments. And then you could start playing with distributed firewalls. So it was like, wow, that seems to suck, right? But that's the way it was. Now, I'll do a separate video on this, but I have to blow my whole environment, redo it again. There is a way now, and I can't remember what version it was. I think it was 3.2. Don't quote me, or if you know, go ahead and type in the comments. I think it was 3.2 and vSphere 7 Update 3, okay, where we could do networking only. Sorry, let me back up. Security only in a vSphere environment, and it would basically deploy your NSX environment, and you didn't have to move your machines from your port groups. It would basically do all that stuff for you. It would create that VLAN transport zone. It would create VLAN-backed segments and do, lack of a better term, like a symbolic link. So you didn't have to move your VM from your regular port group to the NSX segment. It did kind of a link, I'll call it a symbolic link. Just there's no better way for me to explain that. So now when you create these rules, it does apply. Okay? So I just wanted to point that out to you. But if you do the full network install, I want to do networking and security, then it only works on NSX-backed segments, whether it's a VLAN-backed segment or an overlay. My segments are all overlays that I'm demoing. Yeah. So I just wanted to point that out to you. Another way to test this, let's try this out. Let me show you something else here. Okay, let's go and put Web 1 back to where it was supposed to be, okay? So let's go back to here. Let's go back to Web 1. Come on, edit settings. So we're editing our settings. Just want to make sure I was recording there. Let's go back to browse. And we're going to go back to web segment. Say OK. We're OK. And we're back on the web segment. Let me just test my connectivity again. Let's just ping. Yeah, my outside world there. There we go. That's good. All right. So one other thing I want to show you, and that'll be it. Again, if you haven't already subscribed, you can please subscribe to the channel. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go into Plan and Troubleshoot. Under Plan and Troubleshoot, I'm going to go into Traffic Analysis, and I'm going to go to Traceflow. Now, right over here, it talks about my packet information. I'm just going to leave it all at the default. I can pick my source as a VM or a port or interface. So I can pick VM. I'm going to say Web 1 is my VM. And I can say the pick the network adapter. If it's got multiple ones, you pick which one. And then I'll pick my destination. It can be a VM or a port or an IP address if I wanted to. I'll say VM. It's going to be database 1. And again, the network adapter. And I'm just going to say trace. I'm going to hit enter. So Traceflow, here we go. It's going along. And this is basically going through. It's not injecting a packet where the VM sees it. It's going along the line here. So it actually shows me the round trip. It was received, network adapter 1, and the timestamp, right? So it shows me Web 1, went through the web segment, went through the gateway over here, the database segment, and it arrived at database 1, right? And again, you can click on this to get a little bit more information if you want to, right? So this is kind of nice. Now, so 1 delivered, 0 dropped. Honestly, I actually like the older interface better. Let me kind of show you that. This is called the policy interface, or using the policy APIs. I'm going to go under System, and this is just me personally. I'm going to go into, is it User Management? No. Oh, I always forget this. General Settings, User Interface. User Interface Mode. I'm going to edit, toggle visibility. I'm going to say to all user. Default mode is policy. Notice a policy or manager. Policy, I'll say save, and then I'll say refresh my interface. And then once I've done that, let's see if I go to Plan and Troubleshoot now. Notice over here now I get this choice. Do I want to use policy or manager? Policy uses the newer policy APIs, which is yes, that's what you want. Manager uses the old APIs, which are still around. But again, if you're doing API programming here or scripts, you want to use the policy one. I'm going to click on manager. I like Traceflow in that interface better. You'll see why. You might like it too, right? And then under here, you got Traceflow. And again, I'm just going to pick a virtual machine, Web 1. Come on. Where are you? Web 1. It's not as pretty looking. Destination VM, database 1. And again, pick the network adapters. I'm just going to hit trace. Here we go. So right now it's just doing a simple ping. It's kind of injecting a packet, but the VM, it doesn't go into the VM. If I was sniffing it at the VM, if I was doing packet captures in the VM, I wouldn't see it. Okay, it's just going along the path here, right? So just give it a few seconds, and it's going through. Hopefully it doesn't crap out on me. So come on. Again, I don't have the fastest environment on the planet. It is a lab environment. It is what it is type of thing. There we go. I like this because it actually shows you it injects it where it's going along the path along the side here. That's great, but notice here, this is the part pictures, says 1,000 words. So web is on the web segment. It's on this host here, host 1. It's going through the tier 1 gateway out to the database segment to the database VM, which is on host 3. Guess what these are? These are my TEPs. If I can click on this, it shows me it went through a Geneva tunnel and it shows me the status. So I really love that, right? Takes the guesswork out of everything. Like, is this going through Geneva or whatever? That's the part I really like. Again, I haven't played enough with the other one. I'm kind of used to this one. I'm going to close this warning here. I'm going to do, I'm going to edit my tracing here. I want to be something more specific. So web 1, I'm going to go advanced. And I'm going to say, I wanted to pick protocol, TCP, source port is 22. Destination port is 22. You can get really fancy here if you want to. I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to hit trace, and let's see what happens now. Okay. So here we go. So I'm trying to basically go from TCP port 22 from web 1 to database 1, right? So let's see what happens. Come on. And we wait. And we wait. And you see over here, it shows me actually a red line, all right? Shows me it's dropped right here. Dropped by Firewall Rule 4073. That's really cool. Notice it was dropped at the host. There's a red line over here. Let's try one more thing out just for the heck of it, right? Let's go back into policy here. Let's go back into security, distributed firewall. Let's go on to actions here. Exclusion list. I showed you this already. I'm going to exclude web 1. I'm going to say save. Now let's go back into policy. Let's go into plan and troubleshoot. Traffic. Oh, I'm not in policy. I'm sorry. I want to go to manager. Let's go to Traceflow. Let's edit this. Actually, I didn't have to really edit. Okay, web source, destination, port 22. Great. Let's hit the trace button on it now. Let's see how that differs from what we did before, right? Remember, I now excluded all my webs and stuff. And once I've done this, there's actually one more thing I want to mention, which I realized I kind of forgot to mention. So hopefully those of you stuck around, you'll benefit from this. Okay? Come on. Notice now is dropped at host 3. It's funny that there's no red line over here on host 3, but yeah, whatever. So it dropped by firewall rule 4073, but it was at host 3. So it actually went all the way through here and then got dropped at host 3 up to the database. Probably should be a red line there. But anyway, it doesn't really matter. I just wanted to point that out to you. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention is I created firewall rules based on the name of a VM, right? So, and these groups are dynamic in nature. So I could say, yeah, so whenever I'm creating my web servers now, just make sure they got the word web in it and make sure my database servers have the letters DB in it. And then these rules will automatically be applied. I don't need to go in on the weekend and modify rules and whatnot, right? So again, this is very dynamic in nature. Now, I created it based on the name of the VM. Now, some of you might be out there wondering, hopefully you stuck around this long, you might be wondering, Steve, what happens if I change the name, the display name of the VM? So yes, in vSphere, you could get like a rogue administrator in vSphere going, I'm going to change the name, the display name of the VM, which is considered bad practice, by the way. And being a rogue administrator also is bad practice. But I'm going to change the display name of the VM. Now, when you change the display name of the VM, it does not change the name of the files that make up the VM. That's why it's bad practice, okay? So the rules still apply, okay, because it's all in the config of the VM and all that. Now, some of you probably already know this. If you do a storage vMotion, so let's say I change the name of Web 1, I change it to Santa Claus 1, and I do a storage vMotion, I migrate that VM from one data store to another, and maybe I'll migrate it back, whatever. When you do a storage vMotion, it will update the file names to match the display name. And guess what? At that point, the firewall rules don't apply anymore. So you might be going, whoa, I don't like that, right? I could have a rogue administrator circumventing my NSX firewall rules, right? So again, yeah, that's a possibility if something like that happens, right? But if I go under security here, remember, under inventory, I created my groups based on the name of the VM. But there's a thing called tags. If I click on tags here, these are NSX tags. These are not, I repeat, not vSphere tags. So you can go in and add a tag, give it a name, and give it a scope. A scope could be like a category. Like maybe I'll call this name web. That's the tag, web servers. I'll call the tag web servers. And the scope is, I don't know, prod for production, right? And then I can go and select VMs at that point. I'm not going to save this, okay? I can go in and select my VMs. Maybe I got web servers production, web servers for development, web for whatever, tenant A, tenant B, whatever. So you can create a bunch of tags here, right? Then you go and you select the VMs and you apply the tags to the VM, right? Now, when you create the rules, so you create your groups based on tags, and then the rules would still work. There's no way your vSphere admin can circumvent that at that point, right? So if you're worried about it. The downside of this method, there's work involved. You got to sit down and create tags, right? So ultimately, yeah, this is kind of the what they call leading practice, like best practice, but best practice doesn't mean it's the only way to do things, okay, folks? But I just wanted to make sure I mentioned that to make sure everything was complete. That's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, hit that thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button. It's free. If you want to get notifications on more of these, hit that little bell button. I'm going to try and crank out a bunch of these at least one a week, maybe more a week. So we'll take it from there. And again, leave comments below if you're interested in live streams. I'm thinking about doing live streams for an hour on Thursdays at 5 p.m. Eastern time, right? Something like that. Anyways, but if you're interested in that, leave comments down below. I'll either do it probably be like 5 p.m. Thursdays. That's what I'm thinking. Anyways, thanks very much. Have a great day or evening or morning. Bye now.